Let's go to another issue. The Wolverines, Australia's cross-party group of MPs established to stand up for Australia's national interest against the Chinese Communist government. It's now gone global. A new parliamentary alliance has been established across 7 national legislatures and the European Parliament with the aim to urge governments to adopt a tougher and more transparent position on China.
China, under the rule of the Chinese Communist Party, represents a global challenge.
One which will define the next century.
It is a challenge which touches all of us.
This challenge will outlast governments and administrations, and it transcends party politics.
When countries have stood up for democratic values and human rights, they have done so alone, sometimes at great cost.
We, the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, stand together to coordinate the response to this great challenge.
There is strength in unity.
I'm joined now by co-chairs of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China, Chairman of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, Andrew Hastie in Canberra, and Victorian Labor Senator Kimberley Kitching in Melbourne. I'll start with you, Andrew Hastie. Why do we need this group? Is it to toughen up Western parliamentarians to be alive to the challenges that China now poses, given its military and economic strength? Are we not tough enough?
Well, good evening to you, Peter. Kimberley and I both agree that politics is a contest of ideas, and the International Parliamentary Alliance on China is a group of like-minded legislators from across the world. We've since had Norway, Lithuania, the Czech Republic and the Netherlands join us over the weekend, and we're all committed to democratic nations remaining sovereign, the integrity of their political systems, and a global rules-based order that upholds human dignity. And we recognise that these things can't be taken for granted. They won't uphold themselves. And so building a network across the globe where we talk about the challenge posed by an authoritarian China will mean that those things will indeed be upheld. And that's an important thing. No garden looks after itself. You have to tend to it. And that's what we're doing through this network.
Senator Kitching, what do you want to achieve?
What we want to achieve is making sure that China, there's a lot of trade that goes on with China, there's a lot of interaction with China. We want to make sure that some of the issues, and I think one we've seen recently is Hong Kong and the national security laws there, that Hong Kong, for example, where China did agree with the international community when it passed back to China from the UK, one country, two systems was the underlying criterion there. But of course, what we've seen in recent days is, of course, that system being undermined by Beijing. And I think a lot of people around the world, not just parliamentarians, but a lot of people are very concerned about what's going to happen in Hong Kong. And obviously the British Parliament has been debating whether to extend asylum or extend refuge to Hong Kong citizens back to the UK, where they're British overseas citizens. So I think what we want to do is actually make sure that, that there is accountability, there is transparency. We all benefit from a greater deal of that in the world, I think.
Andrew, clearly it's bipartisan at your level, at a national level, and we've heard comments from Anthony Albanese saying he'd tear up something like the Belt and Road if it was in place at a national level. Of course it isn't, but there's real problems though when you get down to the states. We know in Victoria, this Belt and Road debt deal, Daniel Andrews will soon sign for Victoria. What can the Commonwealth do about this sort of stuff if it's against national policy, but the states are running off with their own agenda?
It's a great question, Peter. Look, we've done a number of things over the last 4 or 5 years. We've toughened up FIRB. Josh Frydenberg just last week announced the toughest changes to the foreign investment laws that govern this country since 1975. We have the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act, which creates a central register of all those assets that are critical to our lives together. So if Daniel Andrews wants to go off on his own foray and conduct foreign policy and enter into strategic arrangements, then he's going to come up a fair bit of legislation and regulation which protects those things critical to our national life. So I suspect the Victorian people have cottoned on what's going on here. They want more transparency, and this is going to be a difficult few years for him up until the next election if he doesn't sort it out soon.
Senator Kitching, you're a Victorian senator. You're in the federal parliament, obviously, as a senator, but you're a Victorian Labor woman and have been for a long time. You're pretty brave speaking up, given the territory down here. Have you made yourself enemies by speaking up about China?
Well, I mean, we are lucky enough to live in a democracy, aren't we, Peter? So I would hope that everyone respects the right of people to have an opinion. We know that that is not extended to a lot of people, for example, in China, and probably increasingly in Hong Kong now. But I think, I think that on principle it was not good for the Victorian government to enter into those arrangements, and I think that you have to say we have to call something out when it's not right, and I think that it is the responsibility of the Commonwealth of Australia to enter into foreign policy arrangements, trading arrangements. Obviously that can be a concurrent power as well, but I do think that we need all of our ducks lined up and pointed in the same direction when we are looking at foreign policy. And I think that having a state government do enter into a BRI, particularly I think a BRI where we know from other countries around the world that that has not ended well. And I'm thinking, for example, of the Sri Lankan port where they couldn't afford the interest repayments, and not only was the port taken, but also 15,000 acres of land was taken in lieu of the interest repayments. So, I mean, it's not ideal. And I would also say, Peter, it's pretty expensive money to borrow. States and the Commonwealth can issue bonds, as they have done, for example, for large infrastructure projects, if that was necessary. Borrowing money, I would imagine, from Beijing would be a more expensive enterprise. So I think even on an economics...
expensive and not just in the usury.
That's right.
It's expensive in absolutely the moral component. Andrew, I've got to ask you, you're from Perth, and there's a lot of pressure from Perth business people to just shut up and take the money. There's talk now that the Five Eyes Alliance, the intelligence alliance, the security alliance, will now be broadened to include economic interdependence or economic relationships, because I think everyone understands that China will retaliate across the trade measures, and this is a level of protection. What's your thinking on that?
I think this is a really good initiative by Josh Frydenberg. He's reformed FIRB, and now he's looking at creating closer economic ties amongst the Five Eyes. I mean, this is exactly what we want to see. So my hat off to Josh Frydenberg. This is a very good development, and it's just the start. And it comes after the UK has backtracked on its Huawei 5G decision, which was, frankly, in my view, a bad decision. And so this is really good. We're consolidating now, and we need to as we come out of COVID-19 into the recovery.
Andrew Hastie, Kimberley Kitching, thank you very much for your time, and congratulations on this initiative. Let's hope more and more parliamentarians around the world join it. Thank you.